I spent years believing there was a formula. You know that feeling when everyone around you seems so sure about what makes a relationship work? They'd tell me things. You need to have the same hobbies or opposites attract. You'll just know when you meet the right person. And I believed them. I really did. I thought if I just followed the right steps, checked the right boxes, I'd find someone and it would all make sense. But here's the thing nobody tells you. Those rules contradict every single one of them. My friend Sarah married someone who loves hiking as much as she does. They spend every weekend on trails, posting photos of sunrises from mountain peaks. Everyone said they were perfect because they shared this passion. Then there's my cousin Marco, who married someone completely different. She's a homebody who reads poetry while he's out playing soccer with friends twice a week. And you know what? They seem just happy, maybe happier. So which rule is the right one? I remember sitting at a coffee shop in March 2023, watching this couple argue about whether to order dessert. She wanted to share a slice of cake. He wanted his own. It was such a small thing, but I caught myself thinking, see, they're not compatible. As if dessert preferences determined the success of a relationship. How did I get here? When did I become someone who judges love based on cake? The truth started hitting me slowly, like those optical illusions where you suddenly see the second image. All these rules we're told, they work for some people and destroy others. I've seen couples who are madly in love fall apart. I've seen arranged marriages where people barely knew each other turn into something beautiful over time. There's no pattern, no guaranteed formula. Think about it. We're told we need to be in love deeply and passionately. But then we're also told that passion fades and real love is about commitment. So, which is it? Do we need butterflies or do we need stability? And what about families? Some people say you're marrying into a family, so they better be good people. Others say it doesn't matter because you're building your own family now. Both can't be completely true, can they? I started asking people who'd been married for decades what their secret was. An older couple at my gym, married 43 years, told me they never go to bed angry. Sweet, right? Then my neighbor, married 38 years, laughed and said, we go to bed angry all the time. We just wake up and deal with it in the morning. Same outcome, completely opposite approaches. Last summer, I went to a wedding where the bride's father gave this speech about how they knew it was meant to be because they liked doing everything together. 3 months later, I went to another wedding where the groom's sister talked about how beautiful it was that they gave each space to the individual. Both couples looked equally happy. Both received the same applause. Both probably believed they'd found the secret. So where does that leave us? If opposites attract, but also birds of a feather flock together, if absence makes the heart grow fonder, but also out of sight, out of mind, if you should never go to bed angry, but also sometimes you need space to cool off, then what's actually true? What can we actually hold on to? Maybe that's the point. Maybe the discomfort of not knowing exactly where we need to be. Because if there was one true rule, one guaranteed path, wouldn't everyone just follow? Wouldn't divorce rates be zero? What if the lack of a rule book isn't a problem, but actually the only honest thing anyone's ever told us about love? Here's what nobody wants to admit. It's all uncertain. Everything. You could do everything right, according to one set of rules, and it still falls apart. You could break every supposed rule and end up in the healthiest relationship of your life. I hate that this is true. I really do, because uncertainty is terrifying, and we want guarantees, especially when we're talking about spending our entire life with someone. I watched my sister and her husband almost split up last year. They loved the same things, same music taste, same shows, same weekend plans. Everyone thought they were perfect, but that's exactly what almost broke them. They were together constantly, doing everything as a unit. And somewhere around year 4, they looked at each other and realized they'd lost them. They couldn't remember who they were as individuals anymore. Too much togetherness, turns out, can suffocate you just as badly as too much distance. Then there's my coworker, James. He married someone who's practically his opposite. She's vegan. He loves barbecue. She meditates. He goes to rock concerts. Their friends took bets on how long it would last. That was 7 years ago. They're still together, still different, and somehow it works because they have their own lives and come back to each other with stories. But I've also seen that exact scenario destroy other couples who felt like they had nothing in common. The problem isn't the togetherness or the separate. The problem is thinking either one is the answer. Some couples need to be joined at the hip. Others need separate bedrooms and solo vacation. And some need both, depending on the week, the year, what's happening in their life. There's no formula you can write down and follow. What about love? Everyone says you need to love the person you marry. Sounds obvious, right? But then you talk to people in arranged marriages who didn't love each other at first and built something real over time. Or you hear about childhood sweethearts who loved each other desperately and couldn't make it past year 2 of marriage. Is love the requirement or isn't it? And if it is, what kind of love? The butterflies kind or the steady kind? I remember talking to my uncle about this at a family dinner last November. He'd been married 30 years. I asked him if he was still in love with my aunt. He looked at me like I'd asked a strange question and said, "Some days yes, some days no. Most days, I don't think about it like that." Answer bothered me for weeks. It felt wrong. But maybe it was the most honest thing anyone had said to me. Because here's the thing, that initial spark, that can't eat, can't sleep feeling, it doesn't last forever for anyone. Brain chemistry won't let it. Those feelings are designed to get you attached, not to sustain a lifetime. So if you're waiting to feel that way permanently, you'll be waiting forever. But if you dismiss those feelings entirely and marry someone you feel nothing for, you might spend your life wondering what you missed. So where's the middle ground? The answer I keep coming back to is the one I least want to hear. It depends on the people, on the timing, on 1,000 factors you can't control or predict. Maybe you need that initial spark. Maybe you don't. Maybe you'll grow into love. Maybe you'll grow out of it and back in again. Maybe the version of love you have in year 1 looks nothing like year 10. And that's not failure. That's just change. What if the only real rule is that there are no rules? What if the only thing that actually is whether both are willing to figure it out is knowing full well it might not, choosing it anyway? That's not romantic. That's not what anyone wants to hear. But it might be the only. Everyone has an opinion about family. You're not just marrying them. You're marrying their family. People like it's written in stone. My mom told me that when I was 16, she said to watch how a guy treats his mother because that's how he'll treat you. She said if his family is messy, your life will be messy. And I believed her because it sounded wise, like something mothers are supposed to. But then I met people whose in-laws were nightmares and their marriages are solid. I met others who loved their partner's family, felt welcomed and embraced, and still ended up divorced 3 years later. My friend Lisa's husband comes from this warm, tight-knit family that does Sunday dinners and birthday parties for everyone. Her own family is fractured, distant, and cold. She thought marrying into his family would fix something in her. It didn't. Because his family isn't her family, no matter how kind they are to her. There's this other idea people push, that once you get married, your family is now your spouse and your kids. Everything else is secondary. Your parents, your siblings, they move to the outer circle. Some people do this naturally, and it works beautifully. They build something new together, and everyone understands. But I've seen people try to force this, and it tears them apart. One of them feels cut off from their roots, resentful, like they had to choose. I think about my friend Tom, who married someone whose father is honest, awful, controlling, critical, makes every gathering uncomfortable. Tom thought he could handle it. thought love was enough. 5 years in, he's exhausted. Every holiday is a negotiation. Every phone call from her dad ruins her mood for days. He didn't just marry her. He married into that dynamic, whether he wanted to or not. But I also know people who barely see their in-laws, and it doesn't touch their marriage at all. So which is it? Does family matter, or doesn't it? The frustrating answer is both. It matters tremendously until it doesn't. It's irrelevant until suddenly it's the thing breaking you. There's no way to know in advance which situation you're in. You can't test for it. You can't prepare for how you'll feel when her mother criticizes how you load the dishwasher for the 100th time, or when his brother needs money again, or when your own parents don't approve of your choice. What I'm starting to understand is that the family you come from matters less than the family you're willing to create. But even that isn't a rule, because some people can't separate from their origin family, and sometimes okay. Sometimes that closeness, beautiful. Sometimes it's suffocating. Sometimes it changes over the years. What felt supportive at 25 feels intrusive at 35. Last spring, I watched my cousin get engaged to someone whose family didn't come to the engagement party. Not because they disapprove, but because they just aren't that kind of family. They don't do big celebrations. They don't gather for every occasion. My cousin's family does. Every birthday, every achievement, everyone shows up. She kept saying it was fine, she understood, but I could see it bothered her. Not because his family was bad, but because they were different. And different feels like rejection sometimes, even when it isn't. The question isn't whether someone has a good family or a bad family. The question is whether you can both navigate whatever family situations exist without it poisoning what you're building. Can you set boundaries? Can you hold space for each other's complicated feelings about parents and siblings? Can you figure out what your family will look like without a template to follow? Because at the end of the day, nobody else lives in your house. His mother's opinions don't sleep in your bed. Her father's expectations don't sit at your breakfast table. You let your family is whoever you wake up. But knowing that and actually feeling it are two completely different things, aren't they? Here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. Marriage is a decision, not just the proposal, not just saying yes at the altar, but a decision you keep making every single day. Some days that decision feels easy, natural, like breathing. Other days it feels like you're choosing to stay in a room that's too small with someone who suddenly feels like a stranger. And on those days, you have to decide again. I had lunch with an old friend in September, someone I hadn't seen since college. She'd been married 8 years. She told me something that stuck with me. She said there were moments, real moments, where she thought about leaving, not because he did anything terrible, not because she didn't love him, just because the life she didn't choose started looking better than the life she did. The job she turned down, the city she didn't move to, the version of herself that would have existed without him. She said sometimes she grieves that parallel life like it was real. But then she said something else. She said that in those moments, she remembers that at 27, marrying him was the best decision she could make with the information. The person she was then chose this path. And maybe if she could go back with everything she knows now, she'd choose different. Maybe not, but she can't go back. And spending energy wondering is just stealing from the present. So she chooses to honor that younger version of herself who said yes. She chooses to believe that woman knew something worth knowing. That conversation changed something because we talk about marriage like it's fate, like you meet the one, and everything just falls into place. We don't talk about it like what it actually is, a contract, an agreement. And like any agreement, you need to discuss the terms before you sign. But most people don't. They assume. They hope. They think love will figure out the details. My brother got engaged last year. I asked him if they'd talked about kids. He said, yeah, they both want them. I asked how many. He didn't know. I asked who would stay home if they had a baby, or if they'd both keep working, or how they'd handle childcare. He looked at me like I was being negative, like I was raining on his happiness. But those aren't small questions. Those are the questions that end marriages when people realize they had completely different assumptions. Who cooks? Who cleans? Who manages the money? Do you combine finances or keep them separate? What happens if someone loses their job? What if someone's sick? Do you want pets? What about religion? What if one person's career takes off and requires moving across the country? These sound boring compared to love and passion, destiny, but these are the things you'll actually deal with every single day. The butterflies don't last, but someone still has to take out. I know a couple who almost divorced because neither of them had explicitly said they didn't want to live in the suburbs. They both assumed the other one wanted it, so they bought a house an hour outside the city. 2 years later, they were miserable, resenting each other for choice neither of them actually wanted. Something that simple, something that could have been one conversation before they got married. The thing is, having these conversations doesn't guarantee anything. You can agree on everything and still grow apart. People change. What you want at 30 might not be what you want at 40. The person who said they never want kids might change their mind. The person who promised to always be adventurous might wake up one day craving stability. You can't contract against that. You can't plan for every version of yourselves you'll become. But at least if you have the conversation, you start from honesty. You start from knowing what you're both agreeing to right now in this moment as these versions of yourselves. Maybe that agreement will need to be renegotiated later. Maybe it won't survive certain changes, but at least you'll know what broke, instead of wondering if you were ever on the same page to begin with. At least you'll have tried to see each other clearly before deciding to build a life together. Isn't that worth something? There's this moment that happens, usually after the wedding, after the honeymoon glow fades, when you realize your family isn't your parents. It's not your siblings or your childhood home or the people who raised you. Your family is the person next to you in bed. And if you have kids, them too. That's it. That's the unit now. Everything else, everyone else, they become extended, secondary. And for some reason, nobody really prepares you for how strange that feels. I watched my best friend go through this 2 years ago. She got married, moved across the state with her husband for his job. Her parents still called her every Sunday expecting updates, wanting to be involved in every decision. Where are you spending Christmas? When are you visiting? Have you thought about buying a house near us? She felt split in half, trying to honor the family she came from while building the family she's creating. Her husband didn't understand why she couldn't just tell them no. She didn't understand why it felt impossible to do that. It took her almost a year to realize that her loyalty had shifted. Even if her love hadn't, her husband and their life together had to come first. Not because her parents were bad people or because she loved them less, but because that's what marriage is. It's choosing someone and building something new. And you can't build new while trying to maintain old in exactly the same way. Something has to give. Usually, it's the old patterns, the old expectation, the old version of family. But here's where it gets complicated. Some people never make that shift. They stay enmeshed with their parents, their siblings, their childhood family dynamic, and sometimes that works. Sometimes both people in the marriage understand that family of origin stays primary, and they're okay with that. There's no rule that says you have to put your spouse first if you've both agreed to a different arrangement. The problem is when one person makes the shift and the other doesn't, or when nobody talks about what they're expecting. I think about what family even means. Is it the people who share your blood, the people who raised you, or is it the people you choose to keep choosing? My aunt once told me that family is whoever shows up, whoever's there when things fall apart, whoever celebrates your small victories, Whoever knows your worst parts and stays anyway. By that definition, family can be anyone, your spouse, your friends, your neighbor who brings you soup when you're sick. It's not about biology or law, present, but we're so conditioned to think family means your parents and siblings. We're taught that those relationships are permanent, unbreakable, more important than anything else. So when marriage asks you to reorganize that hierarchy, it feels like betrayal. It feels like you're being disloyal or ungrateful or selfish, when really you're just growing up. You're just becoming the adult who gets to define family for themselves now. Last winter, I had coffee with a woman from my gym. She'd been married 23 years. She said the healthiest thing she and her husband ever did was move away from both their families early on. Not because their families were toxic, but because distance gave them space to figure out who they were as a couple without everyone's input. They could make mistakes privately, create their own tradition, fight, and make up without an audience. When they moved back years later, they came back a solid unit, not two individuals still half attached to their original family. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone should. But there's something to the idea of protecting your new family while it's forming, like a plant that needs to establish roots before it can handle harsh weather. Your marriage, especially in the beginning, is fragile. It needs time to become its own thing before it can stand the pressure of everyone else's expectations, opinions, and needs. The shift isn't about loving your parents less. It's about understanding that your primary emotional home is now partner. That's where you go first with good news and bad news. That's who you consider when making big decisions. That's whose needs you prioritize when you can't make everyone happy. And if you have kids, they fold into that primary circle too. Everyone else, no matter how much you love them, has to understand they're not at center anymore. That's not cruelty. That's just what it means to build something new. There's this frantic energy people have when they're looking for someone. You can see it at bars, on dating apps, weddings, when all the single people are scanning the room. It's desperate, exhausting, and somehow it makes finding someone harder, not easier. Like when you're trying to remember a word, and the harder you try, the further away it gets. Sometimes the searching itself is the problem. I spent my mid-20s actively looking. I optimized my dating profile, said yes to every setup, went to events I didn't even enjoy just because there might be single people there. I treated finding a partner like a job I could work harder at, like effort-guaranteed results. And you know what happened? I met a lot of people who were also frantically searching, and we'd size each other up like we were at an audition. Does this person check my boxes? Do I check theirs? It felt transactional and hollow, and I mistook that hollowness for just not having met the right person yet. My neighbor is 72. She got married at 38, which was considered really late back then. I asked her once how she met her husband. She said she'd stopped looking. She'd bought a house by herself, adopted a dog, started taking pottery classes just because she liked them. She was building a life she actually wanted to live, with or without a partner, and then she met him at a community garden where she'd started volunteering. He was planting tomatoes in the plot next to hers. They got married a year later. When she told me that story, I rolled my eyes internally. It sounded like one of those stop looking and it'll happen cliches that single people are so tired of hearing. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she wasn't saying give up or don't try. She was saying that when you're desperately searching, you're not actually present in your life. You're just scanning for the next possibility, the next person who might be the answer. And nobody wants to be someone's answer. People want to be chosen by someone who's already whole. Think about it. When you meet someone who's happy with their life, who has friends and hobbies and routines they love, there's an attractiveness to that. They're not looking at you like you're supposed to complete them or fix their loneliness. They're just interested in you as an addition to something already good. That's completely different from meeting someone who's searching, who needs you to make their life feel worthwhile. One feels like an opportunity, pressure. Last April, I stopped actively dating. Not forever, not as some strategy, but because I was tired. Tired of swiping, tired of first date small talk, tired of trying to impress people I wasn't even sure I liked. I started saying no to setups. I joined a running group because I actually wanted to get better at running, not to meet someone. I took a weekend trip alone to a city I'd always wanted to visit. I cleaned out my closets, fixed things in my apartment that had been broken for months, called friends I'd been neglecting, and something shifted. Not because I suddenly met someone I didn't, but because my life started feeling like mine again instead of this waiting room where I was killing time until the real thing started. I stopped seeing being single a problem to solve. It just became my current situation. Neutral, neither good nor bad. Some days I loved having the bed to myself. Some days I wished there was someone to share dinner with. Both things were true, and neither one defined my worth or my future. Here's what nobody tells you. You can't find the right person if you don't know who you are outside of wanting to be with someone. You can't build a partnership if your entire identity is wrapped up in becoming half of a couple. Because then, who are you bringing to the relationship? What are you offering besides need and hope and the desire not to be alone? It's not enough. It's never been enough, even though we pretend it should be. The people I know who found good relationships weren't looking desperate. They were living. They were dealing with their own mess, pursuing their own interests, building friendship, working on themselves, and somewhere in the middle of that, they met someone who was doing the same thing. Two people who had lives bumping into each other and deciding to see if their lives could fit together. Not two people searching for someone to finally make love. Maybe the real work isn't finding someone. Maybe it's building a life you don't need to be rescued from. Taking care of your space, your health problem, your growth. Being someone you'd want to be around. And then, if someone shows up who adds to that instead of completing it, you'll recognize, not because they're perfect, but because you're ready. Because you're not looking through the lens of desperation anymore. You're just open, and that might be the only real preparation there is. Here's something that took me too long to learn. The right person might not give you what you want in the way you imagine. And that doesn't mean they're wrong or that you're settling. It just means love doesn't always look like a picture in your head. Sometimes it speaks a completely different language, and you have to decide if you're willing to learn it. I grew up watching romantic movies where love was grand gestures and perfect timing, and people who just understood each other without having to explain. So when I got into relation, I expected that. I expected someone to know I needed comfort without me having to. I expected them to show love the exact way I wanted to receive it. And when they didn't, I thought it meant they didn't care enough or we weren't compatible. I didn't consider that maybe they were showing love, just not in my language. My friend Rachel almost left her girlfriend over this. Rachel's love language is physical touch. She wants hand-holding, hugs, sitting close on the couch. Her girlfriend isn't wired that way. She doesn't naturally reach out, doesn't think to initiate physical contact, but she does other things. She fills Rachel's car with gas when it's low. She meal preps lunch for Rachel on Sunday nights. She reorganizes Rachel's closet when it gets messy. She's showing love constantly, just not through touch. For months, Rachel felt unloved. She kept asking for more affection, and her girlfriend kept trying, but it never felt natural, always forced. They almost broke up. Then Rachel's therapist asked her a question that changed everything. Is she showing you love in other ways that you're not counting? And Rachel realized she was. She'd just been so focused on what was missing that she couldn't see what was there. She had to decide. Could she value the love that was being offered even if it didn't arrive in her preferred packaging? This is where rigidity kills relationships. When you have such a specific idea of how things should be that you can't recognize good things that show up different. I wanted someone who texted me, "Good morning," every day. I thought that was how you showed you were thinking about someone. Then I dated someone who never texted good morning, but always called on his lunch break to ask about my day. Same intention, different delivery. I almost dismissed it because it wasn't what I'd decided counted. We do this with everything. We want someone who's spontaneous. Then we get upset when they plan a surprise we're not in the mood for. We want someone thoughtful, but we define thoughtfulness so narrowly that we miss 50 thoughtful things because they don't match our definition. We want someone who communicates well, but we mean someone who communicates exactly like we do, and we get frustrated when they need to process internally before talking. I think about my cousin and her husband. She's extroverted, processes emotions by talking about them immediately. He's introverted, needs time alone to understand what he's feeling before he can discuss it. When they fight, she wants to talk it out right away. He needs to go for a walk first. For years, she thought his walking away meant he didn't care about resolving things. He thought her immediate need to talk meant she was being pushy and not respecting his process. Neither was wrong. They were just different. They almost split up over this difference, but then they got into couples therapy and learned to create a compromise. When they fight, he tells her, "I need 2 hours to think, then I promise we'll talk." She gets reassurance that the conversation will happen. He gets the space he needs. It's not what either of them naturally wanted, but it worked. They had to become flexible enough to meet each other in the middle instead of insisting their way was the only right way. That's the thing about flexibility. It's not about losing yourself or accepting less than you deserve. It's about understanding that there are multiple ways to get to the same place. If you need to feel loved and someone is making you feel loved through action instead of words, does it matter that it's not your preferred method? If you need security and someone provides it through consistency instead of declaration, is that less valid? Maybe the question isn't, are they giving me what I want? But am I open to receiving what they're giving? Because here's the harder truth. You're not going to be fluent in each other's languages. Not perfectly, maybe not ever. There will always be moments where you're offering something that the other person doesn't quite know how to receive or asking for something they don't naturally know how to give. The question is whether you're both willing to keep trying, keep translating, keep being flexible enough to bend toward each other instead of demanding the other person reshape themselves entirely. That flexibility, that willingness to meet someone where they are instead of where you wish they'd be, might be more important than compatibility ever was. But nobody puts that on a wedding invitation, do they? The fantasies we build are so detailed. We know exactly what our future partner will be like before we even meet them. How they'll look, talk, what they'll do for work, how they'll make us feel. We create this complete person in our heads, and then we go out into the world expecting to find them. And when real people don't match up, we think something's wrong with them. We don't consider that maybe something's wrong with expecting a real human to match a fantasy. I had a list once, actually wrote it down when I was 24. 15 qualities my future partner had to have. Things like loves to travel and financially stable and makes me laugh and close with their family. Sounds reasonable, right? Except I was so attached to that list that I dismissed people who had 13 of those qualities, but not the other 2. I treated it like a checklist, like if someone didn't have every single thing, they were automatically disqualified. Looking back, I don't even remember why some of those things were on there. Did I really care? Or did I just think I was supposed to care? My sister dated someone for 3 months who was kind, reliable, had a good job, treated her well, but he wasn't ambitious enough for her vision. She had this idea that her partner needed to be climbing some ladder, chasing some big dream. He was a high school teacher who loved his job and had no interest in becoming a principal or moving into administration. He was happy, but happiness without ambition looked like settling to her. So she ended it. Years later, she told me she still thinks about him sometime, wonders if she made a mistake letting go of someone good because he didn't match her idea of impressive. We're told not to settle, and that's good advice, but somewhere along the way, not settling became don't compromise on anything ever. It became if this person doesn't check every box, keep looking. And that's not realistic. That's not how humans work. Nobody is going to be everything. Nobody is going to fulfill every need and want and fantasy you've ever had. At some point, you have to decide what actually matters versus what you just thought would be nice. Last year, I went on a date with someone I'd met through friends. On paper, he was great. Good career, interesting hobbies, easy to talk to. But he was shorter than I usually dated. I caught myself fixating, not because it actually bothered me in the moment, but because it didn't match the picture I'd built. I'd always imagined being with someone tall. Ridiculous, right? But I almost didn't go on a second date because of it, because my fantasy was so rigid that height felt like it mattered. I did go on that second date, and it went nowhere for actual compatibility reasons. But that moment made me realize how much I was filtering real people through imaginary criteria. The expectations multiply the longer you're single. You watch friends' relationships and add things to your mental list. You see someone's partner do something sweet and think, mine needs to do that too. You read articles about green flags and red flags, and suddenly you're analyzing every person. They're a test, grading. Does he text back fast enough? Does she plan dates or just go along with what I suggest? Is he emotionally available? Is she too available? You can scrutinize anything into a problem if you're determined enough. And then there's the waiting for someone who meets every requirement, who makes you feel a very specific way, who arrives in your life at the perfect moment with the perfect background and the perfect personality. You're waiting for a fantasy while real, imperfect, complicated people are right in front of you. People who might actually be good for you if you could let go of what you thought you needed and pay attention to what's actually being offered. I'm not saying lower your standard. I'm not saying date someone who treats you badly or makes you unhappy just because perfection doesn't exist. But there's a difference between standards and rigidity. Standards are about respect, kindness, compatibility on things that genuinely matter. Rigidity is about that list, those specific traits, that exact vision you've been polishing for years. Standards protect you. Rigidity isolates. The hardest question is figuring out which is which. Is this a real deal breaker or just something that doesn't match my fantasy? Am I protecting myself or am I protecting an idea that was never real to begin with? Because the truth is, you might meet someone who's 70% of what you imagined and 100% right for you. Or you might meet someone who's exactly what you thought you wanted and realize the fantasy is better than the reality. There's no way to know until you're willing to let real people be real instead of asking them to be perfect. Maybe the person who's right for you won't deliver love in the exact way you picture. Maybe they'll be messier, quieter, different than you planned. Maybe they'll challenge you instead of completing you. Maybe you'll have to learn their language, teach them yours, and some days it'll feel harder than you thought love should feel. But maybe that's more honest than any fantasy ever was. Maybe that's what actually builds something that lasts. Not perfection, just two people willing to be flexible enough, patient enough, real enough to figure it out together, without a script, without a list, just with whatever they actually are. At the end of all this, after you've thrown out the rules and accepted the uncertainty and stopped searching desperately and become flexible enough to meet someone where they are, there's still one thing that matters. Both people have to want it, not just in the beginning when everything feels easy, but later, especially later, when it stops being easy and starts being work. When you wake up next to someone and for a moment you can't remember why you chose this. Both people have to keep choosing it anyway. There's a word in Portuguese my grandmother used to use, querência. It doesn't translate perfectly, but it means something like a deep want, a longing, a pull toward home. She'd say that's what marriage needs. Both people having querência for each other, for the life you're building, for the commitment you made, not just love, not just compatibility, but that fundamental wanting, that decision to keep coming back even when part of you wants to run, because you will want to run sometime. That's the part nobody warned you about. There will be days, maybe weeks, where you look at your life and think about the other path you didn't take, the person you didn't date, the job you didn't accept, the city you didn't move to. You'll wonder if you made the right choice. You'll wonder if that parallel version of yourself is happier, freer, more fulfilled. And in those moments, the only thing that keeps you there is the decision to honor the choice you already made. My dad told me something when I asked him about his 40-year marriage. He said there were real periods, where he wasn't sure he wanted to be married. Not because my mom did anything wrong, just because life got hard or boring or suffocating. He said the same was probably true for her, though they never talked about it during those times. He said what got them through was remembering that at 23, marrying her was the best decision he knew how to make. And maybe if he could go back with everything he knows now, he'd choose differently. Or maybe not. But he can't go back, so he chooses to trust that younger version of himself. That's different from staying out of obligation or fear, or because you've already invested so much time. That's staying because you made a promise to, including your past self, and you're choosing to, even when it's hard, even when you're not sure. It's honoring the fact that at one point this felt right, and rather than constantly second-guessing that moment, you're going to protect it. But here's the crucial part. Both people have to be doing this. If only one person is choosing to stay, choosing to work on it, choosing to honor the commitment, it doesn't work. You can't will a relationship into working through sheer determination if the other person has checked out. The querência has to be mutual. You both have to wake up most days and decide, yeah, I want this, even when it's imperfect and frustrating and not what I imagined. I think about my friend's parents who got divorced after 32 years. Everyone was shocked. They seemed fine. They never fought in public. They had grandkids together. But when I talked to my friend about it, she said her mom told her something that made sense. She said for the last decade, she was the only one choosing. Her dad was just there, passive, going through motion, and she got tired of being the only one with querência. She got tired of wanting it enough for both of them. That's the thing that movies don't show you, the daily choice. The unglamorous decision to stay when you're annoyed or bored or disappointed or scared. The commitment isn't just in the wedding vow, it's in every morning after. It's in the moments when you think about leaving but don't. When you think about what else could be out there but decide what's here is enough. Not perfect, not easy, just enough. And maybe some people will say that sounds depressing, that love should feel effortless, that if you're choosing to stay, then something's wrong. But I think that's the fantasy talking again. Real love, the kind that lasts decades, it's not effortless. It's effort that you're willing to make. It's work that you choose because the alternative, losing this person, this life, this history, feels worse than the work of staying. So maybe the only real rule, if there is one, is this. Find someone who wants it as much as you do. Someone who'll keep choosing you even when choosing you is hard. Someone whose querencia matches yours. Not someone perfect, not someone who completes you, just someone who's willing to keep building this thing with you day after day, choice after choice, knowing full well that none of it is guaranteed, knowing that you're both just doing your best with no rule book and no promises except the ones you make to each other every time you decide to stay. Maybe that's all it ever was. Two people with querencia, holding on, letting go, holding on again, and calling it love. After everything, after all the analyzing and planning and trying to figure out the formula, you're left with something simpler and more terrifying. You just have to be open to the possibility that someone could show up who doesn't match your list but somehow fits your life. Open to the idea that love might look nothing like you thought it would. Open to being wrong about what you need. That openness is harder than any rule you could follow. I met someone last month who told me they'd been single for 6 years. Not because they couldn't find anyone, because they'd been so hurt by their last relationship that they closed themselves off completely. They went on dates occasionally, but there was this wall up. They could feel it themselves. Knew other people could probably feel it too. Like they were participating in dating, but not actually available, not actually willing to risk anything real. And they said it felt safer that. Lonelier, but safer. That's what fear does. It convinces you that protecting yourself is more important than connecting with someone. And maybe sometimes it's true. Maybe sometimes you need that wall while you heal. But at some point, if you want to actually find something, you have to take it down. You have to let yourself be seen, be known, be potentially hurt again. Because there's no way to love someone without giving them the power to hurt you. That's just of admission. Being open doesn't mean being naive. It doesn't mean ignoring red flags or settling for someone who treats you badly just because you're trying to be flexible. It means approaching people with curiosity instead of judgment. It means asking yourself, could this work? Before you ask yourself, what's wrong with this person? It means giving someone a real chance instead of dismissing them because they don't immediately feel like fireworks. My therapist once told me that most people meet their person and don't even realize it at first. That big lightning bolt moment we're all waiting for, it's rare. More often, it's someone you knew for a while as a friend or someone you went on 3 unremarkable dates with before something shifted, or someone you almost dismissed but gave another shot for some reason you can't explain. The connection builds. It doesn't just appear fully formed, but we're so impatient now. We swipe past people in seconds. We decide on the first date if there's potential. We're waiting for that immediate spark, that instant knowledge that this is it. And if we don't feel it right away, we move on. We never give things time to develop. We never let uncertainty exist long enough to turn into something real. We want guarantees up front, and life doesn't work that. I think about all the couples I know who've been together for years. Almost none of them have that dramatic how we met story. It's usually something boring. We worked together. We met through mutual friends. We were both at the same party. We matched on an app. Nothing cinematic about it. The story isn't in how they met. It's in how they chose to keep showing up for each other after that. The story is in all the small moments that nobody sees, all the choices that built something bigger than either of them expected. So maybe the last thing to understand is that you can't control this. You can work on yourself, build a good life, be open and flexible and willing. But you can't force someone to appear. You can't manufacture the right timing. You can't make someone choose you the way you're choosing them. All you can do is live your actual life right now as it is. Take care of your space, nurture your friendship, do work that matters to you. Be someone you'd want to know. And then, if someone shows up who adds something real to that life, you'll notice, not because they're perfect or because they match some list, but because something in you recognizes something in them, a possibility, a potential, a current. And you'll have to decide if you're brave enough to find out what that could become, if you're willing to be uncertain, if you're willing to be wrong, if you're willing to let go of the fantasy long enough to see if the reality might be better. Because that's all any of this is, a willingness to try, knowing it might not work, a willingness to be open, knowing you might get hurt, a willingness to choose someone imperfect and let them choose you back, imperfect, and build something together without knowing how it ends. No rules, no guarantees, just two people with querencia, showing up, staying open, seeing what happens. And maybe, if you're lucky, if you're both willing, if the timing works, you're flexible enough, and brave enough, and honest enough, maybe it becomes something worth keeping. Maybe it becomes home, or maybe it doesn't. And you survive that too, and you stay open anyway, because the alternative is closing yourself off forever. And what kind of life is that? So you stay open, you keep living, and when someone shows up who might be right, you'll know what to do. Not because there's a rule, but because you'll feel that pull, that querencia, and you'll decide if you're willing to follow it. That's all it ever was. That's all it ever will be. If this made you pause, question, or rethink something you always took as truth, share it with someone you trust. Love isn't built in silence. It grows in conversation. And if you want more reflections like this, grounded in psychology and real life, stay with us.